right, and we're on. So, okay, so here's what I find interesting. Do you find that more people your age are, or how should I phrase this? Do you feel that people your age, first of all, are just aware of the importance of this topic?
Okay, that's a great question. So I think that relatively, I think there's a lot more people, there's a lot more individuals that are on the more extreme side of activism, but on the whole, I think that those are just a select few individuals that are on that extreme. As a whole, I don't think I think there's still a lot that can be done to make the general demographic of our age group aware of issues and especially like mainstream issues, environmental issues, issues that aren't being publicized as much. These kind of things, I think there's still a lot more. There's still a lot more that we can be doing to be aware about these issues. Because I'm sure that my parents are a lot more aware than I am, and I'm sure that that's the same for a lot of other people my age as well.
So, is there something in particular that you think is blocking that awareness? Like maybe, do you think this needs to be discussed more in school?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you think people just aren't, or like people your age aren't sure of what their role is in or what they can do? Maybe it's a feeling of being powerless almost.
So I think there's definitely been an increase in what we think, at least speaking environmentally, I think there's been a lot of increased activism from the side of companies and such to be more environmentally oriented and to be less damaging to the environment. I think to um, support a lot of younger people are supporting those kinds of trends because they're being more available to them. They're made more easy for them. Those decisions are easier for them to take. Those environmentally friendly products are on the shelves right next to the non-environmentally friendly products. So it's a matter of choosing. So it's become a lot easier on our part from the work that people in previous generations have done. It's become a lot easier on our part to make those right decisions.
Right. That, yeah.
But to help that along, I I mean, there's definitely been a lot of stuff going on at school where there's there's a greenhouse in our school, and there's different movements to be more green. But it's not just a part of making your school more green; it's a part of making the students want to be more green. I never really appreciated how amazing the greenhouse was until this year when I really got into gardening. And so I think it's little things like that that help you get the perspective on what it really means to be green, where you just want to be green for the sake of not for the sake of saving the planet, but for the sake of your own enjoyment. Everyone does it for that and not for this great thing of saving the environment, and then everyone's just already doing their own parts, helping the environment along in the way.
That is a great point. Uh, so, do you think maybe just the framework of how issues relating to the environment are um, are given to people? Like maybe should teachers in school be approaching it differently, or is this something maybe that needs to be more of a discussion at home with parents? Like, what do you think would help people want to engage in or take that interest? Like, like how did you even decide? Oh, hey, gardening, this is
Mm-hmm.
cool. Like, what do you think pushed you? Maybe that could work for other people.
Right. So for me specifically, I'd say I self-studied for the AP environmental exam this year. I got a five. But with that studying and also being at home, I kind of really liked studying and being more knowledgeable about all of these aspects of the environment. Having that knowledge gave me a kind of like a confidence and a kind of like, oh, I got this kind of thing going into certain learning. Like when I was reading through different things about knowing the right type of soil for your gardening, I was like, oh yeah, I learned that. I learned what the different kinds of soil are, and it was just very it was a very comfortable place for me to be in because I already had that information. So I think definitely the education aspect of it is major, and that so a lot of kids get that background in biology when they're in high school. At the very least, that's something that they get, and that's a great thing. In addition, I don't know if everything is necessarily going to come from the textbook, though. So you're going to get that basic foundation from the textbook, but to actually it's for furthering it, the reason I wanted to study AP environmental science on my own is because I had that background in biology that I loved, because I was part of the environmental ambassadors, because the environment's something I'm passionate about. But otherwise, I don't know if I would have done that if I didn't have those interests. So if you want to really further it from that basic biology class and from that environmental science class, if you want to further it, I think that really comes from not giving pedagogy about the world is changing, the climate is being destroyed, because that might make you feel like, okay, this is a big issue and the government has to tackle it, we have to work on tackling it. But it's kind of like it's not something that's brought down to one person perspective. If you want to do that, I think that kind of comes down to just like, what are your interests, what are things that you like to do, and then finding those interests and then matching them to different things that are environmentally friendly. So as I said, you like to be outside a lot. Maybe switch to an electric lawnmower. Maybe pick up gardening on your own. Maybe shop local for your produce, so you're not encouraging trucks to drive all the way from Iowa for your potatoes or something. So Idaho, not Iowa. Things like that. Yeah, I think that it comes down to bringing it to a personal level when you want to have change on the individual level.
That's great. I agree. Um, oof, you answered a lot. It's great, really. All right, this is interesting. If you could pick one or two things, what would you tell people to do to help take care of the environment on a daily basis?
Okay. I think the biggest things, I'd say one thing is that I guess a lot of people don't really realize how much trash we're making. So on a daily basis, I'd say um, I'll just speak about my family, for example. We might be putting out, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 bags of trash a week, and that's quite a bit. So a lot of trash, and that's for one family. So when you combine it with all the families putting out trash out there, just imagine how much space we're taking up with landfills and things like that. And when that stuff goes to the landfills, a lot of the organic matter or something, things like meat, when they're decaying or that kind of stuff, releases methane. And what a lot of people might not know is that methane is about, um, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think about 25% more reflective of, well, 25% reflective of the sunlight, trapping the sunlight that comes into our earth. And that's way more than carbon dioxide that we know is a big problem. So methane is also one of those big greenhouse gases, and that comes from landfills. The major contributors, landfills, agriculture too. But trapping that causes the earth to heat up more and contributes to climate change. And so if we just think about how much trash we're putting out there and try to do our best to reduce the amount of waste that we're creating, I think that could go a long way on a large scale to bringing down a little bit of the greenhouse gases that we're putting out there. So maybe some ideas to do that is maybe start your own compost pile if you have the space, if you have the ability to do so. Maybe consider starting a greenhouse, compost pile. Um, Maybe consider definitely consider not using single-use plastic items, so switching to sort of like more reusable items when you can, where you can, trying your best to not throw everything out right away. Even if something is single use, maybe try to find a way to repurpose it so you're maybe using it just one more time. Maybe take those grocery bags from the store and reuse them to, I don't know, use as trash bags in your bathroom or something like that. So try your best to stretch the amount of plastics that you're using, stretch their use, and when necessary, try to recycle if you can, if those items are recyclable. So do your best to reduce the amount of trash that goes into the landfill. And then the second biggest thing I would say is watch your water consumption. So obviously we're not gonna stop using water, and I don't think we're gonna switch to, like, I think what New Delhi might have done at some point, or Dubai, where they were in such a water scarcity that they were using sand to clean out their dishes. But I think just by watching how much water we use, maybe if you have a faucet, using one of those faucet control attachments to reduce the amount of water that comes out at once, or maybe just taking shorter showers, maybe just being a little bit more quick with washing dishes if you can. Some little things like that. Maybe when you wash your dishes, use that gray water. Maybe plug up your sink, use that gray water and use it to water your plants or your grass or something like that. Just use that water to water your greens. And that way you're kind of again, just like the plastic, you're stretching that use of the water, and you're not wasting as much. So you're kind of putting more life, you're getting more bang for your buck, kind of, and that goes the same for the environment.
That's great. This is perfect. I want to make sure that people that see this, I want to get the point through to a lot of people as to, I want to make sure that this encourages people to do their part. And so in part of thinking about that, um, can you explain for me, for these people, why I think people hear all the time, oh, use less water, like, take less time, like turn the sink off when you're brushing your teeth, right? And so we hear some of these ideas, and also, by the way, the ideas you gave are very innovative, and I actually haven't heard them. But so can you say for these people, explain why use less water? How does this affect us? What is the point? I think a lot of people don't know that, and they just hear it and they don't do it because they don't actually understand why.
Okay, yeah, sure. So it comes down to a lot of things, but I'll hit some of the main ones. When you think of all the water on Earth, about three quarters or two-thirds, something like that, of the Earth is covered in water. So the land is only a small part of the Earth. So you'd think, yeah, there's all that water, so why do I need to conserve? Well, of all of that water, only 3% of it is fresh water. Water that we can use to drink, water that, like, potable water, I guess, water that we can use to drink, clean, for our daily activities. 3% of all the water on Earth is what we can use. Of that 3%, about 2-ish%, I believe, is locked in the polar ice caps and in glaciers and things like that. So when you think of it, all that water, approximately 1% of it is available for humans and other things for all of our freshwater uses. That's not a lot. And it's been helping us over the past. We've been using it over the past few years. And yes, the water cycle. Water is recycled, and it's evaporated, and it comes down as rain again. But we're using it in such a way that it's kind of being used up too much. So if you think about this, when it rains, the water doesn't just evaporate like that. The water sinks into the ground where there's grass, where there's dirt. The water sinks into the ground, and what it does is there's these aquifers. So groundwater, essentially. The water is stored underground beneath all those layers of dirt in these essentially just water reservoirs. And what a lot of people might not know is that when you have irrigation on farmland, when there's all these crops out in the U.S., all of these farmland agriculture areas, these people have irrigation systems. And what a lot of these irrigation systems tap into are those aquifers. So they have wells, or they have methods to reach all the way down beneath the ground to those aquifers. There's water reservoirs, and they pull that water up to use in their farmland to water their crops. And there's a very large aquifer running down the Midwest area. There's a very large aquifer. I believe it's called the Ugalala, but I could be getting that wrong, something like that. And that aquifer has been used for so many years that it's actually being drained. It's running low, and it's only replenished by rain. It's only replenished by rain. So if you think about the rate of how much water is used to water crops on a daily basis and how much it rains, it's not equal. So the aquifer is being depleted faster than it can be replenished. So people in the Midwest are starting to run. They're starting to run low on water. The Midwest is, when you think about it, there's a lot of drier land, and especially with removing the water from the ground, it's just depleting so fast that it's not being replenished at the same rate it's being depleted. So when you think about that's just one section of the United States. When you think about how this is going on in many places, you realize that it's a big problem that these aquifers are being depleted, that people that might need the water just for drinking and other purposes, that water is being directed elsewhere, and it's getting harder for them to get that clean water. So it's just getting harder for people to get clean water in general. On top of that, when you think about how it's hard to clean water once it's been used. When you use water, all the water that goes down your drain gets sent to a wastewater facility where they go through lots and lots and lots of steps to clean your water. So what they do is remove the big debris, then they remove all the sewage, things like that. They remove all the gunk from your water, and then they disinfect it with chlorine or some other methods, ozone, things like that. And then that water is used for other purposes, maybe irrigation, things like that. So a lot of your wastewater isn't necessarily going to be returning for your drinking. It might be tap water, things like that. So you're necessarily, and that water is also contaminated with the chlorine. There's been a lot of research going into the right amount of chlorine to use in that water. People are concerned that they're using too much chlorine, and that's having negative health effects. That too much chlorine to disinfect that water is having negative health effects on us. So when you think about how much water we're drinking every day, how much water we need to stay alive, a person dies in 3 days without water. They can go 3 weeks without food, but will only survive 3 days without water at max. So when you think about how much water we need to survive, and we think about what the quality of water really should be, and that we don't really think about the quality of water that goes into our bodies as much as we should, probably, you kind of realize how important water is and how important it is to make sure we have the cleanest, to make sure we have the best quality water, not only for ourselves, but for everyone out there. And in nations where that's very difficult for in many nations, that's a very difficult thing to acquire, either because of geographical reasons, because it's hard to access water, because it's a dry, arid desert reason, or because there's these big companies that are going out into these lands where there's people that don't really have a way to defend themselves. These companies are going out, taking land. Maybe they're doing hydraulic fracking, and what that is they're digging down into the ground with a line, and they're pumping these awful chemicals into the ground to loosen up the ground so they can get their oil and their natural gas. But these liquids can contaminate nearby underwater aquifers or groundwater that other people are having wells, like maybe, I don't know, a half mile over, they have a well and they're drinking that water. Where are all those chemicals going into their bodies? And in it's the same thing. We have tailings pools where harmful contaminants are dumped into, and it's just essentially like a pool of toxic gunk that companies put their waste into, and that's just stored in the middle of in a open area or something like that. It's just essentially a giant pond of really disgusting toxic waste and really harmful chemicals. And if that pond isn't sealed properly, that stuff can seep into the groundwater, and same thing, people around them are getting are getting contamination in their water. So water is an extremely important resource, and it's extremely important that we try to do our best to conserve the amount that we use, to not create an extreme demand for water so that these water sources are being depleted, so that we're taking away from what's not being replaced at the same rate, and so that we try not to deplete what natural resources are already diminishing, what other companies and what other harmful industries are already reducing the amount of fresh water we have. It's important that we do our part not to use too much of what's already limitedly available.
That is perfect. Wow. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Oh my God. Props to you.
Thank
I
you.
did not know that much when I was in high school. Not even close. Um, okay. All right. I have one last question for you. You don't have to answer it.
Okay.
It's political, which is why I say that. But it's, do you think it's important that the politicians in power um, are aware of what most academics will agree are issues in the environment? Do
Okay.
you know what I'm asking? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So we kind of, at least in our country, I don't want to speak too much politically. I can't say that I'm a strong political advocate, or I'm that aware in politics. But from my limited perspective, I can say that there's kind of, at least now you can kind of see that sometimes political agendas might differ from what's best for the country as deemed by scientists. And so my idea is that when it comes to the masses, science is key. You know, on your own scale, you have your religion, you have your beliefs, and everyone has their own beliefs, and everyone that should be respected. But when it comes to large scale decisions that impact extreme numbers of people, that's kind of a science. That's a science relegation. You kind of relegate that to science to dictate what's researched to be best, you know? And when you have scientists that are telling you this is what needs to be done, or this is a big problem, I think it's really important for those in power to listen to it, because it's not like a issue of it's not like one of those issues where, which are equally important. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like an issue like where our funds are being relegated, whether our funds are being relegated to schools, or whether our funds are being relegated to let's say banks or supporting industries, right? It's not a question like that where it's divisive on who's benefited and who's not benefited. When it comes to the environment, if you don't kind of when you don't support those initiatives, it's everyone on a whole that's um, affected negatively. There's no one that benefits in the long run from not supporting ways to help the environment. When you ignore ways to help the environment, and when you're in a position of power, that's definitely something that is going to impact you negatively in the long run. Might not even be you, it might be your grandkids, it might be their grandkids, but it could also be you. Like we're seeing right now, the coronavirus. Just to tie that in, something that some something that people might not realize is that there's these things called superbugs, and what superbugs are when people spray lots of pesticides in their garden, or sanitizer, for example. Take this example: sanitizer on bottles, you see that it says it kills 99.9% of germs, right? So what about that 0.1%? That 0.1% is resistant to that hand sanitizer you're using. So it survives. And because it survives, it can reproduce. And when it reproduces, now you have a whole family, a whole generation of hand germs that are resistant to hand sanitizer and things like that. And now transfer this to things like pesticides, right? When you have pesticides, you're spraying a crop and you have about 99% of the pests are killed. But then you have that 1% that's not killed, and that bug reproduces and takes over the crop, and now you use that pesticide and it doesn't work. So you have to use another pesticide, or you have to use a stronger pesticide. And you use it when you use a stronger pesticide, the strongest in that family survive and they reproduce, and now all these bugs are the strongest. So you think you do that over and over and over again, and you get these incredibly strong bugs, these incredibly strong germs, these incredibly strong diseases that are really, really hard to combat. And so when you think about a lot of situations like that, not only in medicine, but in agriculture, but in things like that, it's kind of like a positive feedback loop. The more you use, the worse the problem's going to get. So it's not a issue of using more fertilizer. It's an issue of how do we get rid of these pests without making them more dangerous. So it's a complicated issue. Um, but going back to politics, I think it's definitely important for leaders to be listening not only to the people but to what they've learned is correct. So in at least in schools, I mean, you kind of see it all around you. It might be hard to see it on a personal scale, but when you look at a lot of global issues, when you look at all of the environmental disasters, all of the hurricanes, all of these extreme tropical storms, the extreme weather is another symptom of the climate change. All of this, all of these changes, it might be hard for granted, it might be hard for older people to recognize this difference because as you know, it's hard to see changes day by day. You know, when you're looking at the 1960s and you're looking at 2020, if you compare them side by side, yeah, it's pretty clear what the differences are. But when you're someone from then and you're going day by day to here, it's such a slow transition. Climate change is on the scale of it's on the scale of decades, centuries. It's not on the scale of a day by day thing. So it's probably hard for older people to see the actual effects from their own experiences if they're not looking at outside sources. And but if you look at Congress, I think a lot of the newer members that have been elected that are coming up, I think they're having a really strong voice because they're kind of seeing what's going on and how pressing the issues are that scientists are bringing up, and they're able to kind of see what is super important. They're kind of able to hold science accountable, like they're kind of able to hold science responsible to as a solution to help combat climate change. And I think especially with the younger activism that's become really popular in younger generations, a lot of older generations also are able to kind of learn as well. And a lot, and don't get me wrong, it's the older generations that are definitely teaching the younger ones about all of this. Definitely, without Mrs. MacArthur, without Mr. Voos, I don't know if I would be where I am today. But it's I think it's definitely a movement that has to come from the masses of the youth, because it's kind of up to the students of the future. It's up to the people that are going to have that leadership in the not only in politics but in any situation, even if you're the manager or the owner of a business, it's up to you too to bring up those environmental changes in your business as well to make it more environmentally friendly. So it's kind of up to the leaders of the future to bring up the changes that are necessary for the future.
Oh my God, you're a great interview.
Thank you.
That's perfect. Okay, I think that's a wrap.
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, talk soon.
Mhm.
Bye.